Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the panel on Unveiling Solutions to Fast-Track Access for Patients. And we have the honor of being the final panel discussion of the session. So hopefully we will keep you engaged, and we hope to have time at the end for some audience discussions or inquiries. And we have a very diverse group of people today with varied backgrounds, various areas of expertise, and so we hope that that brings you the best insights possible. And before I start, I'd like to share one of my favorite quotes by Thomas Edison, which I think is very pertinent for cell and gene therapy. And he said, "When you have exhausted all possibilities, remember this, you haven't." So with that, I'll ask each of the panel members to introduce themselves briefly and their roles and their companies or organizations' involvement in cell and gene therapy and patient access.
Thank you. And thank you for sticking with us through the very last panel. I'm Claire Aldridge. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Forman. We're a company that is using machine learning, AI, bioinformatics, and all the computational tools that we have at our disposal now to really try to drive the improvement of cell and gene therapies and the manufacturability.
Claire, and I'm Ken Forman. I'm the Senior Director of Product Strategy at IDBS, and IDBS is about unlocking the power of your data for making faster and better decisions. And our technologies are really about managing data from the data capture for analysis, reporting, and increasingly important sharing of the data, both internally and between sponsors and CDMOs.
My name is Fuerstenau-Sharp. I'm from Sartorius here, and at Sartorius we believe in partnering really early with our customers, ranging from early stage R&D to all the way to clinical manufacturing, to really help them to get to the clinic faster. We are heavily invested in the cell and gene therapy space. We've made some strategic acquisitions, especially in the raw materials and media space. And I'm looking forward to the discussion today.
Hi, everyone. Again, thanks for coming to this closing panel. My name is Chris Stevens. I'm the Chief Patient Supply Officer at Spark Therapeutics, and we are currently mostly in the AAV gene therapy space, but also more broadly in genetic medicines. We have a commercial product, Luxturna, which is approved in nearly 50 markets around the world, and many in our pipeline that will hopefully follow.
Great, thank you all. So we'll start off with our first inquiry. And I'm wondering what each of your opinions might be on how the current regulatory landscape is impacting the speed to access, and how might we bring that process to, or how might we improve those processes to bring products to market, or products to patient faster, the whole point. And I'm also interested if anybody's had an experience with this new Interact program with the FDA. So who'd like to take a first pass?
Maybe I'll start. And so we, I think we have to realize that I was speaking with somebody at breakfast this morning, and just the growth of this conference, of this Congress, is sort of indicative of the pace of change that is happening across the entire landscape in cell and gene therapy, across the entire ecosystem. And so there are not boundary conditions established for gene therapy, cell therapies like there are in other modalities. And so, I think the regulatory agencies, the health authorities around the world are learning just like us. And so as they learn and they see programs from different sponsors, they see data coming in. One thing is true about them is they're very data driven. And so that's why I think with the colleagues here on stage, I think the ability to produce that data, to curate that data, to speed the cycle from data to knowledge will help this space evolve quickly. And we find it, I think, a very sort of cordial scientific discussion usually when we interact with regulators, and using all means necessary to, whether it be interact or other different programs from health authorities around the world to have the conversations. And so, I think, again, just a bit of grace given to health authorities and to us for the learning curve that we're all on.
I agree. I think that, we saw through COVID how much more quickly things could move through the regulatory pathway. And, we've heard recently the idea of having an Operation Warp Speed for rare diseases. I think we're because of some constraints within those regulatory agencies with people, with data, with understanding these new modalities, we're not seeing the speed that we potentially can get to. But I like to think that the regulatory agencies are starting to be open to that, to say, we want to be your partner in moving these things forward, because there's not that prescribed path like there is in small molecule drug development, for example. So how do we do that? How do we kind of hold hands and work with the regulatory agencies to continue to provide better and better information and better data to help them make their decisions and give them that confidence that these are new modalities. We're starting to learn more about it. I think of just in gene therapy, how we've gone from empty to full to now understanding what's in your full. And that it's evolving just even over the last year. And so how do we work with them collaboratively to move that whole field forward?
Yeah, I think on that point of really collaboration, I think also coming in from the tools provider's perspective, we've seen that increasingly it's important that we really are in this together with our customers. We really support also from the regulator's perspective, because I think harmonization isn't there across the board. So I think really having the strong relationship on helping our customers really make it through the approval process in the most efficient way is critical for us as well, especially when it comes to critical raw materials, where there is no harmonization right now, and really the burden of validating and qualifying these materials lies with the cell and gene therapy manufacturer, and so there we really have to support very heavily.
I think that's going to be a key point and a theme that we'll probably be talking about for this entire panel, which is that as new modalities are being introduced and the science is evolving faster than we can possibly keep up with almost in some ways. And a lot of the presentations we've seen at this conference here with some of the new science that's being developed. But at the end of the day, from the regulatory perspective, we still have to demonstrate that while, yes, there is new science, there's also the ability to deliver these therapies to patients in a way that we can prove to the regulatory authorities that we understand what is happening, not just from a patient outcome perspective, but in the generation, the manufacture of those therapies. And that we have really good process understanding, and it's robust. Even though it's new, the expectations from the regulatory authorities are still held pretty high.
Yes.
So.
Okay, that kind of segues nicely into the next topic. What challenges do you all see that exist when scaling up or scaling out in terms of maintaining your product CQA, your product quality, and meeting your CQAs? And what tools do we need to assess that? Where we are with that?
Yeah, so I think the traditional pathway of defining a target product profile and then translating that into a quality target product profile and then setting CQAs based on that is still the right pathway, but the ability to understand the impact of those CQAs on clinical experience is extremely limited in what is mostly a rare disease field where sample sizes are very small in clinical trials, and generating that understanding is still extremely difficult. So every data point matters much more in order to draw that, to transform that data into knowledge about your product and your process. And so I just think that it's also at a stage where it's still quite expensive to manufacture multiple lots at an early stage. And so the idea of having scale down models that are representative of your intended at scale commercial or late stage process is is a good idea, but it's not something that is ubiquitous across the whole landscape yet. And so we typically are doing now, whatever scale you're doing in GMP manufacturing, you're probably also doing in process development at a very similar scale. And so the ability of AI or machine learning solutions to help us understand and draw inferences where there might not be a first principles understanding is incredibly, could be incredibly informative to how we do things in the future and accelerate how we're drawing these intuitions.
I think, absolutely agree. I think these factories are living factories. And, unlike a synthetic pathway where you can control or look at every step, you don't have that visibility into every step. And I always like to joke that these are, full contact. It's about how do the different ingredients come together? What are the rate limiting steps? What are the what collisions need to happen within these factories, and how do you get visibility into that? And they're not plus minus reactions. How do you kind of nudge it towards being a more efficient, more effective manufacturing process by understanding what the different reagents are, what the different rate limiting steps are, rate limiting resources, so that you can use that to improve the likelihood of getting your outcome? Because when you scale these things up, it doesn't scale up in a 1-to-1 ratio the way we would hope it to. And so, we've got to have an understanding of that. And I do think, that's what we like about using machine learning for this, is being able to get visibility and understanding into those parameters that we can't really control with today's tools.
When you talk about scale up and as where I think many of the people in this room are probably pretty conscious in the CDMO world, especially with T-cell therapies, where the shift on the higher end is to stop with the scale up and move to a scale out model, as we have, whether you're at flask scale or if you're talking small bioreactors, but to have multiple parallel lines, and then the same kind of analysis and ability to analyze what you've got is critical, but now you're looking more from can we be, reproducibility across the different lines becomes critical, for consistency.
Yeah, and on that note, Token, I think really scale up is across the entire platform, right? Not just the equipment, but it really looks at reagents as well. You need to have really tools that scale all the way through from, early stage development to later stage manufacturing, and then also have, of course, security of supply. We'll get to this later, I'm sure, right?
Okay, and that kind of already started the next topic, was how would we see some emerging technologies such as AI or CRISPR or others that I may not be mentioning, helping us accelerate the field and accelerate patient access?
Well, I certainly am a big fan of AI and machine learning, and I think that's one of the things we're really trying to do. I think many of us have been in this space for a long time. We've seen a lot of times where we thought computational tools might be able to accelerate what we're doing, and we haven't always been able to see the value of that. And I think one of the things we're trying to do at Form is to ask very specific questions that the tools we have today, the kind of acceleration of what AI can do now has just been phenomenal in the last year. And so how do we take that and ask very direct questions, not trying to say, we're going to improve the entire world. We're going to improve this one piece of it first, and then we will continue to build on that. And so we're using large language models to look at the nucleic acid sequence of these drugs, the payloads, and using those nucleotides kind of as if they were words, with these large language models. And we've discovered that it is a great use for that technology. We're not saying we're going to change all of drug discovery because we're going to do it all in the computer now, and we don't need scientists anymore. We're always going to need scientists. We're always going to need the creativity and the cleverness. But can we use these tools to narrow down what the scientist applies their creativity to?
Yeah, I think, as with any new technology, the target for its application is an important topic of conversation, because what we all do that starts from sort of discovery biology and goes all the way through to commercialization has so much complexity associated with it. And across that pathway, there's really no taxonomy for, well, here's the state of sophistication of, say, AI as a tool for discovery biology or for translational biology or for manufacturing or for any parts of the value stream within what we do. And so I think for me, it kind of starts there of what tools or resources do we have to just help us make heads or tails of that? And then within those areas, what are the point solutions that we can apply now? And what do we need to maintain kind of a watching brief on to say, okay, when it gets to this point, then it's applicable in our space for helping to speed and fast track solutions.
Completely agree. I think there's really huge potential of AI and advanced analytics and machine learning across the entire cell and gene therapy value chain, right? Whether it's target identification, process optimization, development, and manufacturing. And I think we're definitely also recognizing this from the tools provider perspective and are looking to further, simplify our solutions to implement this. I think AI is no longer a buzzword. It's definitely a reality, and it can only be beneficial to us also for really the COGS, really reducing COGS. I think it's not only really simplifying and speeding up the way to the clinic, but also reducing costs significantly. So,
AI, for a while there, I think probably very recently, was a solution in search of a problem. It was, I love your creative example of being able to use language, large language learning for models for searching through the DNA. But I think the one thing that we're still finding in some cases is it's not necessarily the right answer for all problems, especially those without the data to support it. When we talk about machine learning and how much data it requires. But I definitely think it's getting enough expertise now and understanding that I think a lot of the problems that it can be applied to are starting to really come to the forefront.
Well, I think
it's
that's
an exciting
another place,
time.
right, where we need the creativity. We need the people to think about this is the type of problem that can be solved with this tool, instead of thinking it's the solution for everything,
Right.
or it's got some applications that it doesn't really fit, and it's just going to amplify bias or amplify a wrong path. But how do we think about those problems and say, with the breadth of the opportunity in this technology tool set we have now, this is the solution for this problem?
Digital twins is a great example
Yes.
of that.
Yeah.
Not every single component of the process is ideal for a digital twin. Some are much more complex, and while others are really kind of ripe for the taking right now.
And we're having those conversations with CDMOs, right, to say, where can we help you do exactly that?
Yep. That's great.
Yeah, and you guys wanted me to rant a little bit. I think they've got two diametrically opposed things here. You said it's no longer a term, buzzword, but a lot of people still don't know what AI is or what to do with it at the same time, and we're starting to make that a reality.
Other than making letters in the style of Shakespeare, right?
Yes.
Like your fun
Yes.
chat GPT things.
Exactly. And we have the opposite end of the spectrum. We have the challenge of having enough people, enough knowledge, and enough experience in the industry to support the scale of the industry and where it's going. And on the one hand, you got people thinking, my job's going to be taken away, but then we don't have enough people. So it's really nice to hear all of you have some perspective on the fact that we still need the brains to go along with the inanimate solutions. So moving on, semi-related topic, how might we use robotic systems or automation to help accelerate patient access? And by the same token, what do you see perhaps as some of the limitations of some of these technologies? Again, it's like AI. Some are helpful. Sometimes it's be helpful, and sometimes it may not be.
I think just from the perspective of whether it be automation or AI or any advanced technology, the ability of an innovator company like Spark or our peers to specify what we need is always going to be limited to the size of the data set that we have, and it's still an emerging field. And so the ability to automate things requires you to specify it at a level of detail that you may just not have. And so there are portions of the supply chain that lend themselves to that, and it's mostly on the drug product side of things where you've already have the biological complexity behind you, and you're now trying to figure out logistics of how to get a vial to a patient. And so that may lend itself more to automation where, how many vials of this product would this patient need, and using a robot, say, to pack that out on a per patient basis. That's an application that I think is there. It's already happening. But the other place is to apply it to the data generation side of things. So there are large. We talked a little bit earlier about the ability to characterize your process and your product, and that's also an area for the use of robots to generate data, and then using these other technologies to kind of parse through the data to help you with your scale up. So I think, again, it goes back to that, where can that be applied to speed things up, and where is it actually just a distraction?
Well, and I think about, when you're talking just even about enrolling patients in trials, a lot of times you're limited, especially if you're doing something that requires a lot of, coming back in and having, additional, I'm thinking, I know gene therapy more than anything, but like a patient has to come in every 6 weeks and do this battery of tests, and, it can be very burdensome on the family because they're also taking care of a medically fragile child. Like, are there ways to, I think, using like an Apple Watch, for example, some sort of device, right? It's not robotics, but a tool that allows you to collect unbiased data every day from a patient and maybe take that burden off that, having to come in as often, and then you get even more robust data that you can analyze, and that could potentially, do two things: speed up your clinical trial, because you would have unbiased data, not necessarily skewed by, we know from other trials, right, that the patients do better when they're being seen by this high-touch care, but then also allow patients who might not otherwise have access to these kind of therapies because they don't have the means to be able to do these kind of follow-ups that can be incredibly burdensome. So are there ways to start incorporating this technology and having the regulatory agencies, approve it and see it as a good way to understand what is our therapy doing?
Yeah, a lot of that information is still being collected on surveys as opposed to wearables, so it seems to be ripe for that technology.
Yeah. And this thing tells me, it really knows that I haven't moved.
Bit of an unplanned add-on to that question is, I've worked for some, so I'm going to live in California near Apple, and we talk about these technologies, and they're taking blood pressure, and now they'll tell you if you're going to go into AFib.
Right.
How can we, it's been on my mind, how do we engage with those types of companies that have that technology that really don't understand what we do? And how might we go about that? I don't know if there's an answer, but maybe you guys have some ideas.
I don't, we have a course. I live in Dallas, and UT Dallas is, one of our state universities, and I know the gentleman. He's a young man. He's doing this as an adjunct professor. He's teaching a class on data, and every student gets an Aura ring, and they gather their data during the term, and then they learn how to analyze it, and they look for things, and they, how do we, I think there's a couple of things there. One, that's training that next generation of data scientists with this kind of data, but also how do we partner with companies like that, right? Where it's like, this is in your best interest because it gives you access to a market maybe that you might not otherwise have, and maybe even a path to reimbursement. But also then how do we use this in a way that benefits and isn't a distraction? I think it's a lot of data.
Yeah. I think we need to also take into account, I think the example you gave was great because you mentioned the fact that there's a generational impact there where the younger generation is willing to share that type of data. I think right now there's, with all of the privacy concerns and concerns about personal data and health data and who am I sharing this with and what's it going to be used for, and a lot of concern right now around how pharmaceutical companies are using personal data. A lot of trust has been lost.
I got the email from 23andMe this morning. I don't know if anybody else got it about the data breach.
So, I think that it may just be something that also with time, or as we focus on the younger generation, will actually get access to more data than we will with
Right. Us.
folks, us, yes.
Any further thoughts on that one?
Well, at the risk of plugging another alliance, so there's the Alliance for AI in Healthcare, and I know that they are trying to engage people like Google, companies like Google or Alphabet, who have other ventures in the healthcare space to help connect some of those dots. And I think that the way, at least my observation, it's not rocket science or anything, but the way that any of these technologies get developed is with a sponsor that has a specific problem. And then it's like, okay, the person or the company that helped them develop that turns that into a product, and then they look for another problem for that to solve, and then it evolves over time. And so it's the ecosystem of technology development, and so these hubs that we end up having and forming around the country and around the world, really, when those hubs intersect. So the Bay Area may be a good example, where you have a tech hub, but also a lot of life sciences. And so I think it's going to take those kind of collisions and technology development and sponsors to have specific projects to develop it.
Absolutely.
I guess that's the crux of the matter, is how do we make those collisions happen? Because I know those companies are talking about it, we're talking about it, but it hasn't happened yet. So maybe some group I don't know the group, AI Healthcare, but that maybe we need more of that. If we take that same thought and kind of bring it back a little bit, again to automation. Everybody wants to do automation, so like AI. What do we do when do we make the decisions? You've mentioned that several times, Ken, is when is the right time to make the decision? There's some thought out there, and I have some personal interest in this because I work for CDMOs. I've also worked for product-based companies, and we're all in the business of making product and getting it to patients. You can make it yourself. You can get a partner. You can go to a contract manufacturing organization, and now we have this sort of hybrid of, and I don't want to plug a particular company, but if we think about the concept, do you set up individual unit operations or instruments and sort of develop a daisy chain for the various steps in your processes that work best for your products or your type of products? Or is it better, and when might it be more useful to have a single, already prepackaged, fully integrated system? And how would you see benefits or limitations from either of those? And I think Chris knows exactly where I'm going with this conversation.
Maybe I can start this one. I think it really depends on who you talk to, right? I think there's no right answer. I think what we can see, of course, as a general trend is we have to go towards more closed processes. We have to go towards really integrating systems and modules, but we also have to allow enough flexibility to be adaptable to the individual processes that the industry is running here. So I think, and I guess maybe you can speak better from the CDMO perspective, but I could imagine you have to have even more flexibility to cater to specific customer needs there, right? But this automation and closing the systems theme, I think, is definitely unified across the board here.
Yeah, there are decades of innovation that have happened in the biomanufacturing space that I think it is our job specifically in the CMC space in cell and gene therapy to kind of build the bridge to be able to access that decades of innovation. But we're not there yet in terms of our ability to translate our process and product understanding to all aspects of those innovations. And so I think it is, when you're looking for a partner, I don't think any of us do everything alone, right? We work with partners on different stages, whether it's in the digital realm or in accessing capacity. I think early on, all of the capital that was being invested in facilities was really being done in the CDMO space. And so, there's a needed tool there that we need to figure out how to access, and that's kind of a dance that companies like us are doing with CDMOs, because CDMOs don't have the depth of expertise, and they're relying on us for that. But in many cases, Spark and companies like it, even with all the experience that we have relative to the field, is still not much relative to what may exist in biologics manufacturing. And so it's one of those sort of I think wait and see moments as well of we say we want a full integrated solution, but I don't know that anybody out there has it that can provide it. And so the investment needed to get there is going to be substantial, and not something that any one enterprise is going to be able to do.
It's still just such a young, right? It's so young.
It is. I mean, on the stage we have, Sartorius is up here, and IDBS we're actually part of the Danaher family. So we've got two of the suppliers in this space sitting on the stage, and I think what we've been seeing lately, as suppliers, is really trying to be, first off, to your question, we want to be able to provide either of those type, paths forward, being able to supply a single unit operation, or what is essentially a factory in a box, right? Think of it. I mean, we've had several suppliers and booths here that are in this space. But when we talk about being able to provide it, it's, well, what's missing from that? And what IDBS coming into the picture with the digital side of this, I think that's kind of the next generation of these factories, is being able to not just deliver and show that they understand the science and the equipment that can allow the science to happen. It's well understood for AAV and others, but now we can also overlay the digital solution on top of that to really accelerate your ability to use the equipment, to be able to gather the data, and to be able to gain those insights from it that we talked about earlier.
Well, and I think, if it's okay, I would love to get your thoughts on, I know that in this field, a lot of times what we do is we translate that small scale to a larger scale, and we don't really do a lot of different, we kind of take that small scale and just try to multiply it, right? The way you would take your cookie recipe and multiply it by 10. And that doesn't always work very well. And so what are you guys seeing from customers when they come to you and they say, we've been doing our benchtop lots, right, for all of our preclinical work, and now, how do you guys work with customers to understand what do we know we need to change as we think about this scale up to larger volumes and more commercial grade manufacturing?
Yeah, I can speak to this. I think for us, it's really critical to work with customers early on when they are really at the small scale space. And we found also some of the tools we have currently, the repurposing of them don't work. So there needs to be modifications made that are addressing shear-sensitive cells, for example. We need different impellers, we need other PAT tools. So we need really to modify, but I think we have a solid foundation from the map space to build upon. But I do think really working with customers at very early stages, in a partnership mode, not as we are your supplier, so we really as a partner, and help them because we both benefit from this. We can bring expertise on how to use the equipment and other materials that we provide, and then the customer of course understands their process. So when you merge that together, I think that can be very powerful, but it should happen at an early stage.
Yeah, I think the personnel side of that is critical. The partnering, bringing in experts, Ph.D.s who understand the science, not just push this button and what's going to happen, but really understand what's going on is critical. But,
yeah, there's been a large consolidation of suppliers in this space, whether it be Sartorius, Danaher, Cytiva, many others, right? And I don't mean to exclude anybody there, but what I've yet to see in that space is investment in integrating all of those point solutions in that consolidation. And if we're talking about fast-tracking patient access, on our side, we have to make it all work, right? We have to get from the idea to vials that can be injected into patients to execute on the clinical trials. And so that integration falls on us, and typically the way that comes together is through a number of conformance and engineering and process validation lots. And so if you want to speed that up, one way to do that is to have a data set that can be, that you're not starting at 0, 0 on the grid, and you can start somewhere higher than that because there's an integrated solution that has generated data that you know is going to be robust. And so far in gene therapy, I haven't seen that. And I say that up here hoping that somebody's going to come up to me afterwards and tell me that it exists. Because when I asked ChatGPT to tell me the biomanufacturing story in the style of Dr. Seuss, it was funny, but it wasn't accurate.
Yes.
That's another example of how technology is helpful, but we still need the human brain. Any more thoughts on that, or?
Well, we could talk for the rest of the hour on access to data
have
and sharing of data and IP and all the rest, and that's a constant challenge, right? The more data we have, the faster we could get to our therapies and deliver our therapies, but by the same token, that's the competitive advantage between the companies here. So.
And from my perspective, I'm currently with CDMOs, and I've been for quite a few of them by now, small, medium, and large, and I've also worked in the product arena as well some years back. And you talk about where are processes and what do we see, Maya? We run the gamut. Cell and gene therapy is still young. There are people who have products that are approved and want to make process changes. There are people who are still trying to figure out the process.
Right? There's a regulatory component to that as well, where I wish there were more guidance on how can you make these tweaks and not have to start over.
And it's harder with cell and gene therapy than it is with a discrete molecule, right? But let's see, I was listening to, I lost my train of thought. That's okay. But we see a lot of people who don't know when to make the decisions about what technology to implement. Is it too soon? Am I waiting too long? And one of the biggest things that we have to address is process sciences, process development, and MSAT. So everyone views MSAT, well, I shouldn't say everyone. A lot of people view MSAT as end stage. But to me, they're all process science. You have to do just enough to make sure that you have the data you need, so when you do make changes, you've got something to compare to. And that's not a new thought. That's not something I came up with. But I think that's the challenge that we have is in CDMO sometimes is you've got people who they've got a fixed timeline, they got to get it done. They worry about handing it over to seemingly give it to somebody else who's handling it and their hands off, which is really not the case. Most places I've been, there's always a lot of interaction, but it's that feeling and that concern. But yeah, we're right at that pivotal point, I think, with cell and gene therapies. People are starting to see a need for that, but they still don't really know what to do about it. So all of your expertise should help people. You should be available for all these people to come consult you about when and what you should do and how.
You touched on a really intriguing point there around, well, you mentioned process earlier, Chris. And one of the goals in biopharma for all of these years has been to remove process variability and prove that you can maintain quality with minimal variability, and you understand the variability you may see. And here we are at the Cell and Gene Conference, and we have inherent in our process the variability of the human element being a part of the vein-to-vein process. And everybody's blood is different. The clinics are all different. You don't have total control of the supply chain like you would if you were either captive or even a partner CDMO doing manufacturing for you. And it introduces complexities into the models of your ability to control variability and understand what truly is impacting your patient outcomes. And that's where it makes all the data gathering and the ability to contextualize, understand it, make use of it quickly and easily that much more important. Otherwise, they're just going to focus on the wrong attributes of the process and come
and
to
things you can't influence.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of talk this week too about point of care and decentralization. I don't know that I have a question there, but if you've got any thoughts on that and how that relates to improving patient access, But it makes it more challenging when you have all these different clinical sites. But how do we move from doing clinical trials to actually getting this stuff out to patients once things are commercial? That's a huge, huge scale difference.
Well, I think our go-to-market or commercialization model for Luxturna leveraged center of excellences around the U.S. and it really is a variability reduction play, right? Of trying to work with a smaller number, who I guess the first one that any of them were really doing on a commercial level, and so the desire to decentralize, I think will be met with challenges in the short term, but it has to happen, right? Because access is the other side of this, and the U.S. might be sophisticated, other markets might be sophisticated, but where the patients are may not be in more of those sophisticated markets. So I think it's going to continue to take more investment, and the more we can take, so that uncertainty is going to be there, that variability is going to be there, and so I think it's incumbent upon us to remove the other pieces, the pieces that are within our control while within our sort of four walls, so to speak. And then hopefully that stands up to what it will encounter as it goes outside of those four walls.
Well, and I think about the U.S., right, there are places where we are a very sophisticated market, but then we have huge swaths of the country that don't have the access to healthcare that we enjoy in the large urban centers with centers of excellence. And so how do we even begin to think about that?
It's a social engineering question, I think, because it continually shocks me that where you live in the United States, which theoretically, just because I'm from there, and I've also lived in Europe, but theoretically you should have access to this care, but your span of life differs drastically depending on whether you're in a small town in the Midwest somewhere or the South, as opposed to being on either coast near an academic center or a medical center.
One of my favorite little data points to share is Texas has more uninsured people than Massachusetts has people, right? So just like a little, impertinent to this conversation, but just pertinent to care in general and access to care. And the scale that we have that's different in the middle of the country versus the coasts where everybody is close to, and not everybody, and there are rural places, and I'm not being glib about that, but it's much easier to get to an academic medical center when you're on a coast than in the middle of the country.
So how about a really fundamental question after all these theoretical ones? What differences or what partnerships can we make in supply chain management, and how can we help that contribute to faster patient access? And when I talk about supply chain management, I would also include the related area of logistics. I think that's another big black box for a lot of people, as we know what we have to do, but you can get it all the way to the end, and then what? So I'm curious what thoughts you have on how to improve those, or what might help.
Well, I think the problem that you're describing is more acute in cell therapy than it is in AAV gene therapy, where we have a shelf life of our product beyond weeks. But I think that the comment that I made earlier about the decades of innovation in biopharmaceutical manufacturing, part of that innovation is on formulation development that affords you the ability to create different inventory points throughout and allows you to have more flexibility in how you partner and manage the supply chain, including cold chain. And right now, most of what this industry is producing is frozen, and it requires an infrastructure that may not exist in rural Texas.
Well, we saw that with the COVID vaccine rollout, right? And the problems with the -80 initially.
And so I would kind of maybe turn your question around just a bit and say, I think there are opportunities to, instead of focusing on how do I solve the problem on the supply chain, it's probably a both and, but how do I access that innovation that removes the problem from the beginning of the situation, which admittedly is going to be easier to do in a gene therapy context than a cell therapy context.
until we get allogeneic
Yes.
adopted broadly.
I guess you could say really supply chain management also applies for the process itself, right? And sourcing of materials that you need to run your processes. So I think there, formulation in different senses, like we've definitely seen, trends moving away from animal components in media, for example, really that will ease with supply chain issues if we then have more robust materials in there that are animal component free. And you don't have to now, have various suppliers to source your serum, for example. So I think these are other examples of where really a move or trend in supply chain management can have an impact, and we can really contribute as suppliers of those reagents.
And there's a digital piece of this discussion as well around the supply chain. I was having a conversation with a supply chain manager just 2 months ago at another conference who had a really intriguing issue where they ran into a seriously devolving critical quality attribute, and they had to figure out what was going on. And this is a company that everyone in this room has heard of, knows. They're extremely well positioned on the digital maturity scale, very strong digital platform, and they were able to figure out in 2 weeks that the problem was coming specifically through one of their suppliers, and then worked with that supplier, to get visibility into their process to see that what they had changed, their supplier had changed one of their suppliers. And when they did that, that actually had an impact downstream in the product manufacturing. And when we talk about reducing time and how critical time is in this entire endeavor, they took 2 weeks just to get to root cause of this supply chain issue. And this is an extremely robust digital platform. And a lot of cell and gene therapy companies are much earlier stage and are much earlier in their digital maturity. And I can only imagine without the proper visibility into what's going on with their supply chains, it could take multiple weeks, months to get to root cause on something like that. It really shows the importance of being able to, don't just think of a supply chain as something you drop something off at your doorstep. You need visibility into what's going on there.
I would argue that for some of those situations, it's almost binary. It's not like how many weeks is it going to take, but are you actually going to find an answer?
Yeah, even more to the point, yeah.
Big question. So I'll kind of almost bring this to a close. We have 2 more topics. I'm wondering, since there are a number of us who've been in the industry for decades, and you tend to see patterns repeat. And in the field of biologics, it used to be monoclonals were the new hot thing, and now they're first-line therapies. For example, I worked on Rituxan. It was so new, and now half the people I know have been exposed to it or take it like it's an aspirin. But we've gone through monoclonals, we've done recombinants, now we're doing gene therapies and cell therapies. What lessons have we learned, or what solutions have we identified throughout that evolution that we might use today for the benefit of cell and gene therapy, if any?
Maybe I start. So I think definitely we can learn a lot from the monoclonal space, right? So I think there's, again, looking at the tools that we have at hand, there's many things we can use and repurpose, especially for viral vector production, also for allogeneic therapies. I think for autologous therapies, that's less so the case, of course, because that is not a scale-up but a scale-out model here. But I do think we have a good foundation, on platforms for these more allogeneic or viral vector processes where maybe minor tweaks are necessary to make them more fit for purpose. But autologous is yet another story.
Well, I think for a lot of those therapies too, there was initially the scientific advancement, right, that allowed a new modality to become a therapy, and then there was the operational advancement, right, whether it was process improvement or other things like that allowed these things to really scale. And so I think the most important thing to learn is, where are we in that? Are we at scientific de-risked as a modality? Do we still have some room to improve that? And then how do we, in parallel, start to think about the operational improvements that we can make?
Yeah, I think that cell and gene therapy as a class gets bundled together, but there is an incredible diversity of science that is happening there, and just like AI and language models versus other potential applications of AI, there are some that are much more or less mature, and so I think some of the science is sorted out in certain tissues with certain vectors, et cetera. But once you say, okay, well, what do I need to do to go into the brain, or what do I need to do to go into other, name the tissue, kidney, heart. There are specific companies that have tried to apply certain types of technology and science, and it isn't de-risked yet. And so, we're just on the very cusp of it as a class. And so it's why conversations like this are important. It's why partnerships are important. It's why meetings like this that bring people together are so important. And it is also why policy is going to need to be a part of the solution, because the investment that's going to be required to move this at pace, and the promise is so great still, but also the challenges are there. So it's going to take the integration of many companies. We think that at Spark that the ability to do it at scale matters a great deal, and to be integrated and to have the entire value chain together matters a lot to our strategy. And I think that hopefully is kind of a microcosm of what will exist elsewhere to solve a lot of these problems.
Okay, we'll handle one last topic before we ask the audience if they have any questions for our distinguished panel today. If it's going to be difficult, but if each one of you had to choose one single most promising development that you think will contribute to improving patient access, what would you advocate for today?
I would advocate for, it's around data privacy and all of those kind of things, but for the things that are really enormous costs to our healthcare system, the cardiovascular disease, the Alzheimer's, the things like that, how can we start to get a large enough body of data together that we can understand those diseases earlier when we can intervene a little bit more effectively? I think these kind of things are incredibly burdensome to our entire healthcare system. And so how can we move that upstream and intervene earlier? And I think data is how we're going to get that insight.
And I would just build on that along the lines of when we talk about wanting to make things happen faster, it's not just strictly an issue of speed, as critical as that is to this. We've talked at this very conference about some of the challenges around staffing now, and retaining, getting people on board. And so I think that what we're going to find is that there's also speaking from the digital side, that there's a real need for technology that helps companies get to those insights, be able to make decisions faster and better, but with fewer people, such that fewer people can get to the data that they need to get to so that they can actually make business decisions, that we can get to product release faster without needing the same sizes of organizations we had before, because we need to be able to do this with fewer people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really about the data, but also really about the generation of the insights from the data that we have, right? So I think to both of your points, I think that's absolutely critical. So advances there, I think, are must-have.
And just to take it back to the bigger picture, and it may be a little out of bounds for your question, but I think focusing on health instead of healthcare first. We talked about wearables earlier, but the incentive structure that causes you're talking about population level kind of things, and health needs to be a focus, and incentives need to be there in terms of the allocation of resources towards that. Second, that's not going to cure all ills, so to speak, and there's still going to be a degree of genetic predisposition for disease, but also genetic diseases that won't affect as much. And so I do think genetic medicine is one of the biggest technologies, and there's still an incredible diversity to it. The science is not completely understood, and the application of these digital threads can help us get there, but I think it's a both and. So I think the broader answer to the second part of the question is that it's at the integration of technologies, not in any one. And so hopefully that's what we've kind of addressed here on the panel today.
Great, we do have time for questions, but I'd personally like to thank Claire, Ken, Maya, and Chris for their willingness to get up on stage and talk about these things that are sometimes seemingly unsolvable to many of us, and sharing your expertise. Appreciate your time and your thoughts. And at this time, I'd like to see if there are any questions in the audience, and if there are, it's kind of hard to see from up here. I think somebody has a microphone to bring you. It's an interesting looking microphone.
I was wondering if each of you could chime in. You talked so much about digital tools, computational tools, AI, ML. What do you think is the lowest hanging fruit today within cell gene therapy that's ripe for benefit from some of these technologies? It could be, early on research, discovery, process development. Like, what's that one process that you think, you could optimize through the use of these digital tools, and that would really kind of help and is a big pain point at the moment?
I think bioanalytical tools are certainly a good starting point for, in-process, quality control and also release. I think these are, it's tough to say low-hanging fruit, but these are maybe the first ones I would tackle.
And I would speak from my personal experience and bias here, but the putting in place, we call it in IDBS, we call it a digital backbone or a digital spine, where what we're doing is we're really seeing desire in industry right now and for connecting the ability for manufacturing and process development to share data, in both directions, going from the tech transfer perspective, moving from PD into manufacturing, but also getting that data and having the visibility back into process development for doing things like optimizations and scale out types of analysis or even scale down types of activities, but really making sure that these aren't considered siloed parts of the organization, that they all have visibility to the same data.
And I think kind of extending on that, making sure that then is something that the regulatory agencies can use to make good decisions about, is this product something that we can, sign off on and get into a patient?
Okay, do we have any more questions from the audience? Again, it's hard to see out here. There we go.
So thank you so much for this. What can we as the advocate community do? So we have like two hats on. We have our disease, right? Many of them, we have to be truthful, our reasons, but we also have such great, we've gone from hope in many ways to actually trusting this technology. What can we do to help in these, these areas? Like, can we advocate? Are there things you can do to help educate us on what other discussions we should be having other than our people when we're in rooms with people who are making decisions? I think that would be, there's lots of us. There are lots of us, and we talk a lot, and, I actually was following one, I felt so bad, following this one staffer. I said, just a minute. He said, I gotta go. I said, yeah, I know you gotta go. And I'm following him, and he had his hand on the men's room door. So, so we're passionate, we're ready, I think maybe giving some thought, you have to answer that now, but in your discussions of what information do we need to have and how can we help and like get back to us, and we're here. You have troops.
I think one thing that's really great for the advocacy groups and how they partner with companies, and I've seen this a number of times, is helping identify what are meaningful outcomes for the clinical trials. When we're developing these drugs, we're often thinking about what can we measure, what do we know we can measure, things like that. But if those outcomes don't matter to you as a patient or a caregiver, then we're not making the right drug, and we're not measuring the right things. And for you to help us understand what those measures should be, and then also advocate on our behalf to the agencies to say, this is what matters to us. These are the kind of things we need to see from these therapies to change the quality of life or trajectory of the disease, especially for these rare diseases.
Yeah, I think you're doing a great job, by the way. Like there's incredibly sophisticated understanding within a lot of the patient advocacy organizations, and that is being translated into these advisory committee discussions with health authorities, and I think it's making a difference. So it's like, keep it up.
Making noise. You're doing it by being here. Every place I go now, there's somebody. I go way back to the first real laboratory job that I had. We had patient-specific therapies. We met our patients. I knew the names of the patients. You can't do that much anymore, but just having you come to places like this, and then we have the stories and we take them back. And at a CDMO, oftentimes it's about, there might be the top 15 or 20% of the people in the company might know all about the products and the timelines and clinical filings and commercial filings, but they might not necessarily know what the rest of the company may not know what the product is about. And I remember we started this once at quarterly meetings at another organization where we get up and talk about the product itself. What kind of therapy is this? How does it work at a really general level? How, who does it help? And after that conversation, every single person, science background or not, would come up and say, my friend, sister, brother, uncle, cousin has experienced this, and thanks for letting us know how we're impacting you. So just letting us know why we're doing what we're doing, reminding us and what you need that hope, and you need us to make that difference for you. So that little inspirational speech, sorry. We've run out of time, but again, I'd like to thank the panel very much for your time and your energy and insights. I'd like to thank the audience for sticking with us at the end of the conference, and also thank the organizers and the staff for Cell and Gene meeting on the Mesa, because you guys are fabulous to work with, and you're really bringing us all together to help serve the patients, which is what we're all about. So thanks very much, everyone.